Alright guys, do me a favor. Turn your sound up pretty loud because I want to see if anybody can tell me what this sound is. Are you ready? Anybody know what that was? You said that's the sound of a shotgun? You're absolutely right. According to Wikipedia's Gun Violence in the United States, the FBI said that in 2012, over 8,800 firearm-related homicides were committed. Of those, 6,371 were committed strictly with handguns. If you haven't guessed, I'm here today to talk a little bit about gun control, the history of it, the pros and cons of it, and the future of it. So let's start out with a little bit of the history of gun control. According to the Washington Post, gun control has been around for quite some time. It started back in the early 30s, where back in 1938, the National Firearm Act of 1938 came in, and it has started with not allowing sales of firearms to anybody who was convicted or indicted of a violent crime. Also, in 1968, there were several acts passed, one of which raised the age of purchasing a handgun to 21, and it had to be from a federally licensed dealer. In 1993, the Brady Handgun Violence Prevention Act came into play, and this is where that anybody purchasing a firearm had to have a background check ran on them through the National Instant Criminal Background System, and that is controlled by the FBI. In 2005, the Lawful Commerce in Arms Act came about. Basically, what that's stating is that people cannot sue the companies of the firearms if their firearm is used in a violent crime. Now that we've seen a little bit of history on some of the gun control acts, let's look about some of the pros and cons of gun control. According to the NavajoCodeTalker.org, we're going to be looking at a couple of principles of both pros and cons for control acts. Let's start out with some of the pros. One of the pros is it lowers the amount of gun-related deaths. People think that with stricter laws and making it harder to obtain firearms, it's going to reduce the amount of deaths because, quite frankly, people can't get a hold of guns. Number two is guns are really rarely used for self-defense. More times out of not, even legally obtained firearms are used to commit crimes, not to protect oneself. The majority of the mass murders that have been committed with legally purchased firearms. You can purchase a semi-automatic rifle with a large round capacity magazine and silencers, and that's typically what people will use for them. And number four is they think that it will help reduce the suicides. A majority of suicides are committed with firearms, and they are all legally obtained firearms. People think with a more strict background check and a longer wait period, this should help reduce the ability for a potentially suicidal person to get their hands on a gun relatively easy and commit suicide. Those are some of the pros. Let's look at some of the cons. Well, criminals are always going to break the law. It doesn't matter what gun control laws are put out. Sure, the law-abiding citizens are going to follow them, and it might make it harder for a law-abiding citizen to purchase a firearm, but a criminal will find a way to purchase an illegal firearm. Some people think it actually takes power from the people because your right to bear arms, and they think that the government is trying to remove that right from them. Also, they say another good way to control guns is education. Make people more aware of guns, how to handle them, how to care for them, and really what kind of damage they can do. Having guns more readily available, they say, will help deter crimes, because a criminal's not going to go into a place where they know people that are armed are going to be. They would rather find somewhere where no one's got any weapons and go there, because quite simply that's easier for them. We've discussed some of the pros and cons. Let's look at the future for gun control. Well, really, between the two websites I looked at, the Time website, and Cuoria.com, they both pretty much say the same thing. It's pretty much going to be a stalemate. Right now, neither side, gun lobbyists or the people who are against gun control, will give ground either way. However, according to Cuoria, the demographic of people who are for guns is starting to decline. They say that most predominantly they are white men, age 50 plus, and as that slowly deteriorates out, it's going to allow for the people who want gun control to possibly, 10 years down the future or 10 years down the road, be able to pass more gun laws without having any kind of stop or anything against it. However, Time does make a good counterpoint that even if they do at a federal level, at local and state levels, it can always get bypassed. In closing, we've just looked a little bit about the history of gun control, some of the pros and cons of gun control, and the future of gun control. I just lightly touched on the subject because there's a lot more information to be found, but this should give anybody kind of a good start to responsibly owning a firearm.